A raw chunk of lithium ore goes in one end of this building. A finished electric car drives out the other, and almost everything that happens in between. The battery, the motor, the computer chips, the paint, even the seats, is made by the same company, under roughly the same roof. That company is BYD. The building is its Megafactory in Zhengzhou, China, and by now you've probably seen the drone footage. The one where people say it's bigger than San Francisco, the one with the racing track and the worker dormitories and the robots as far as the camera can see. Here's the part nobody tells you about that footage. The size is a decoy. The scale is what photographs well, so it's what goes viral, but it's honestly the least interesting thing happening on that site. What BYD actually built in Zhengzhou is a supply chain with no seams, wearing a factory as a disguise. And once you understand how deep that goes, you stop asking how they built something this large, and you start asking a much more uncomfortable question. Why can nobody else copy it? So let me get into it, because this is one of those stories where the real machinery is hidden behind the obvious one. First, let me give the scale its moment, because it's genuinely hard to picture. BYD broke ground on the Zhengzhou site in late 2021. Production started less than 2 years later, in 2023. Within 12 months, local media reported the plant was already turning out around 540,000 vehicles a year, which works out to roughly one car rolling off the line every minute. By early 2025, satellite trackers and local reporting put the workforce at around 60,000 people. Analysts studying the satellite imagery that November measured the built footprint at about 22.5 square kilometers, and it was still spreading. To put that in perspective, Tesla's Gigafactory in Austin, Texas, the one people describe as enormous, covers about 3.53 square kilometers. So the comparison people make isn't crazy. This place really is a city that happens to build cars. There's even a test track on the property with a wading pool and a 29-meter sand incline, built partly so BYD can put its own luxury SUV, the Yangwang U8, through its paces. That's the SUV that can float in water for short stretches and has an underwater observation window, which should tell you these people aren't exactly short on ambition. And the parent company isn't short on money either. In 2024, BYD reported revenue of around 777 billion yuan, roughly 106 billion US dollars, with about 80% of that coming from cars and car parts. This is a giant, and it got that big in under 30 years. And the way it got big is the whole tell. BYD was founded in 1995 by a metallurgy researcher named Wang Chuanfu, and it didn't start with cars at all. It started making rechargeable batteries for cell phones, the boring commodity nobody wanted to think about. The company only bought its way into car making in 2003, and for a while it looked like a strange, unfocused gamble. What nobody quite saw at the time is that BYD was coming at the car from an unusual direction. It already understood the hardest and most expensive piece, the battery chemistry, and it worked its way up from there. Instead of starting with a finished car and shopping around for a battery to drop into it, that bottom-up direction is the reason it now owns layers of the car that its rivals never learned to build in the first place. But all of that is the postcard. Now let me show you the engine room, because the story that matters starts the moment you ask one simple question. What percentage of that car does BYD actually make itself? The typical car maker, when you get right down to it, is really an assembler. It designs a vehicle, then buys the guts from a web of outside suppliers. The battery comes from one company, the power chips from another, the seats from a third, the software from a fourth, and the car maker bolts it all together. Investment bank UBS took apart a China-built Tesla Model 3 and estimated that about 46% of it, by value, was made in-house. The rest was bought in. And by industry standards, 46% is already high. Plenty of legacy brands sit well below that. Now here's BYD's number, According to analysis reported by EV Magazine, BYD makes about 75% of each vehicle's components itself. One trade publication quoted engineers who joke that on some BYD models, basically only the windows and the tires get trucked in from elsewhere. Everything else, the company builds. Let that gap sit for a second, because that single comparison, 75% against 46%, is most of the story. It's why the cars are cheap. It's why nobody can undercut them. And it's why this factory looks the way it does. Let me walk you down the stack, one layer at a time, so you can see exactly how far the rabbit hole goes. Start with the battery, because that's where BYD started as a company back in 1995, and it's still the foundation of everything. In an electric car, the battery pack is the single most expensive thing in the vehicle. It runs roughly 40 cents of every dollar you spend building the car. Get the battery wrong, or pay a supplier's margin on it, and you've lost the pricing war before you've bolted in a single seat. So BYD built its own, and it built a strange one. It's called the Blade battery, and the name is literal. Instead of the usual chunky rectangular cells, BYD makes long, thin, flat cells, shaped like blades, and lays them side by side across the floor of the car. The chemistry underneath is lithium iron phosphate, which is cheaper than the nickel and cobalt chemistry most premium electric vehicles use, and far more stable when things go wrong. How much more stable? BYD ran what the industry calls the nail penetration test, where you drive a steel nail straight through a fully charged battery to force an internal short circuit. It's considered the Mount Everest of battery safety tests. In the demonstration at the 2020 launch, a conventional nickel-manganese cobalt cell hit surface temperatures above 500 degrees Celsius and burst into flames. A normal block-style lithium iron phosphate battery reached somewhere between 200 and 400 degrees. The Blade cell punctured the exact same way, topped out between 30 and 60 degrees, with no smoke and no fire. But safety is only half of why the Blade design matters. The other half is structural, and this is the mechanism most people miss. Those long flat cells aren't just resting in a box that bolts underneath the car. They're glued directly to the upper and lower covers of the pack with structural adhesive, forming a rigid honeycomb that spans the full width of the vehicle. In other words, the battery is not a component the car carries around. The battery is part of the car's skeleton. BYD calls this cell to body, and because it deletes the wasted space of a traditional battery module, it increases how much of the pack is actual usable battery by more than 50% compared with an old block-style design. More range, more rigidity, fewer parts, lower cost, all from rethinking the one component that eats 40% of the budget. And BYD doesn't build these in small numbers. Its in-house battery capacity had already reached roughly 135 gigawatt-hours a year as of 2022, enough to rank it among the largest battery makers on Earth in its own right, before you even count the cars those batteries slot into. That's layer one. Now, layer two, and this is the one that genuinely separates BYD from almost every car maker on Earth. The chips. An electric car runs on power semiconductors. The single most important one is called an IGBT, and its job is to control the flow of electricity between the battery and the motor thousands of times every second. If the battery is the fuel, the IGBT is the throttle, and it's fiendishly hard to make well. For years, almost every automaker on the planet bought these chips from a tiny handful of Western suppliers like Infineon and ST Microelectronics. Then in 2021, the global chip shortage hit, and car makers who leaned entirely on those outside suppliers watched their assembly lines fall silent for want of components that cost a few dollars each. Some of them lost hundreds of thousands of vehicles of production. BYD mostly didn't, and the reason is a subsidiary called BYD Semiconductor. BYD designs and builds its own IGBT power chips, and increasingly its own silicon carbide chips, the newer, more efficient material that high-voltage EVs are moving toward. In an interview, a BYD semiconductor executive named Wu Haiping said the company's in-house IGBT had already been fitted to more than 600,000 of its own cars, with the highest mileage single vehicle passing 1 million kilometers on that chip. Think about what that actually means. BYD is one of a very small number of car companies in the world that can design a power chip, fabricate it, package it, drop it into a car, and drive that car onto a ship without ever once calling a chip vendor. When the shortage came for everyone else, BYD was quietly making its own. And here's the twist that shows you how far ahead this went. BYD makes chips for itself, and then it goes one step further. Its semiconductor arm sells a big share of its output to other companies too, which means some of BYD's own rivals are, in a small way, dependent on BYD. It even sells batteries and electric powertrains to Toyota for one of Toyota's own electric sedans. Sit with that. A car maker so far ahead on the parts underneath the car that legacy giants quietly buy those parts from the competition. The chip story doesn't stop at power electronics either. BYD now designs its own driver assistance chip, the silicon that handles the cameras and sensors for its self-driving features, so it doesn't have to buy that brain from a vendor at a vendor's price. And it reaches the other direction too, all the way down. BYD owns lithium mines, locking in the raw material at the very bottom of the battery supply chain. So when I said a lithium rock goes in one end, I meant it almost literally. BYD reaches back past the battery, past the chip, all the way down to the dirt the lithium comes from. Here's what all that in-house silicon actually buys them, in a number you can feel. BYD's plug-in hybrids use that same homegrown power electronics, and the latest version of its hybrid system, according to reporting on the technology, is tuned so tightly that the company claims fuel economy down around 2.9 liters per 100 kilometers and a combined range on the order of 2,000 kilometers on one tank and one charge. That's the payoff of designing the chip, the battery, and the engine to work as one system instead of three parts from three suppliers arguing over who gets blamed for the seams. If you're getting something out of this breakdown, take a second to subscribe, because I dig into exactly this kind of hidden engineering on Chinese technology every week, and the next few are genuinely wild. Now, let me show you the layer people almost never film, because the inside of this factory doesn't look like an inside at all. At BYD's Xi'an plant, reporting suggests operations run around 97% autonomous. Not automated in the loose sense of a few robot arms on a line, but a floor where automated guided vehicles ferry parts around. Intelligent warehouses feed the line, and human hands touch a shrinking fraction of the process. And before BYD builds a new battery line in the real world, it builds it in a virtual one first. The company runs what engineers call digital twins, complete software simulations of its battery manufacturing environments, so it can test and optimize a production line inside a computer before a single real machine is bolted down. That's how you go from breaking ground to churning out 500,000 cars in barely 2 years. You debug the factory before you pour the concrete. Now let me tie the whole thing together, because owning all these pieces only matters if it adds up to something, and it adds up to the thing everyone actually feels: the price. Here's how it compounds. A battery pack BYD builds itself, rather than buying one in, can run roughly 1/5 cheaper, because there's no middleman taking a margin. Do the same thing with the chips. Do it with the motors, the wiring, the molds, the software, the seats. Each layer saves a little. On its own, none of it would move the needle. But BYD sold about 4.27 million vehicles in 2024, and when you shave a slice off the cost of every single component across millions of cars, those small savings stop being small. They compound into a structural price advantage that a company sourcing its parts from outside simply can't match, no matter how slick its own assembly line is. That low price gets blamed on government subsidies, and subsidies are real. But the deeper explanation is plain arithmetic, built one in-house component at a time. And the scoreboard shows it working. For years, Tesla was the world's best-selling maker of pure electric cars. In 2025, BYD took that crown outright, delivering around 2.26 million battery electric vehicles against Tesla's roughly 1.64 million, a gap of more than 600,000 cars. Its sales outside China have been climbing fast, up on the order of 72% in a single year. The company that started life making phone batteries is now the biggest electric car maker on the planet, and it got there by owning the machine that makes the machine. Which brings us to the last layer, and it's my favorite, because it's the point where BYD's obsession with owning things tips over into something almost comical. BYD makes so many cars and sells so many of them overseas that it ran headfirst into a bottleneck most people never think about: ships. To export cars by sea, you rent space on specialized car carrier vessels, and for a stretch there simply weren't enough of them to go around, and the rental rates were brutal. By then, BYD was shipping something like 400,000 cars a year to buyers outside China. And that number was climbing every quarter, and every single one of those cars needed a berth on a boat. So BYD did the thing BYD always does. It stopped renting and started owning. The company now runs its own fleet of ocean-going car carriers. The first, the BYD Explorer No. 1, set sail in early 2024, carrying about 7,000 vehicles toward Europe, running on liquefied natural gas to cut emissions. According to its builder, it was the first cargo ship a Chinese shipyard ever made, specifically to export Chinese cars. The fleet has grown quickly since, with newer vessels like the BYD Zhengzhou and the BYD Changsha, each able to haul around 9,200 cars at a time, and more on the way. BYD even names the ships after its own factory cities, so its cars sail to market inside vessels that carry the names of the places that built them. Sit with the full chain for a moment. This is a company that started in 1995, making the little rechargeable cells that go inside cell phones. Today, it digs the lithium out of the ground, refines the chemistry, builds the battery, designs and fabricates the power chip, casts the body, writes the software, simulates the assembly line in a computer, builds the real one, turns out a finished car at a rate of roughly 1 a minute, and then loads that car onto a cargo ship it built itself and sails it across the ocean under a name borrowed from one of its own cities. From the mine to the sea, it's all one company. No other car maker on the planet owns the whole chain, end to end like that. So back to the uncomfortable question from the beginning. Why can nobody copy this? Because you can't buy 30 years. Every layer of this, the battery chemistry, the chip fabrication, the platform engineering, the raw manufacturing muscle, was built up slowly, one hard and often unprofitable decision at a time, over 3 decades. A rival car maker in Detroit or Wolfsburg or Tokyo could decide tomorrow to bring everything in-house, write an enormous check, and hire brilliant people. And they'd still be staring at a decade or more of investment and failure and learning before they had what BYD already has. You can't compress that timeline with money. Integration. This deep is not something you purchase. It is something you accumulate year after year, until one day you look up and own the whole road from the mine to the sea. That's exactly why the rest of the world has started reaching for tariffs instead of trying to compete part for part. Back in late 2023, the European Union opened an investigation into whether Chinese electric cars were being unfairly subsidized, and both Europe and the United States have since piled duties onto imported Chinese electric vehicles to blunt the price gap. Think about what that admits. When your response to a competitor is to tax them at the border rather than outbuild them, you're conceding that you can't match the thing they built. The tariffs aren't really aimed at a cheap car. They're aimed at a supply chain nobody else has. And to be fair, the fortress has a shadow side, and it's worth saying out loud. When you make everything yourself, a single mistake anywhere in the chain becomes entirely your problem, with no supplier to share the blame or the cost. The same walls that keep the outside world's chaos out can, if demand turns, wall you in with your own overcapacity. BYD is betting an enormous amount that those walls stay an advantage and never become a trap. That bet isn't guaranteed to keep paying off, but so far, the arithmetic keeps landing in their favor, quarter after quarter. So that's what the drone footage is actually showing you. That sprawling site is a country's entire industrial strategy, compressed onto one piece of ground, running end to end with the seams filed off. The size was never the point. The size was just the part you could see from a helicopter. And here's the strange thing about a company that would rather build its own ship than rent one. Once you can make anything, at any scale, for less than anyone else on Earth, the obvious next move is to stop making cheap cars and start making outrageous ones. BYD's own luxury arm already sells that SUV that floats in water for around $150,000. So the question hanging over all of this is what happens when Chinese engineering points that same bottomless capability at pure luxury with no price ceiling at all? Which is exactly what's going on inside China's new $413,000 motorhome, a rolling apartment with a sticker price that makes even a floating SUV look modest. That full teardown is on screen right now. Start with that one.